For most players, 32 Heat is the final challenge in Hades. It's the highest difficulty that you can play the game at that still offers a unique reward, at least for the first time that you beat it. Yet it's not even a Steam achievement because the developers thought it was still too difficult to include it when they want all the achievements to be very attainable for the average player. Allow me to explain what 32 Heat is for those that are unaware. Hades has a modular difficulty system called the Pact of Punishment, which allows you to choose between many different modifiers to increase the difficulty of the game as much as you want as quickly as you want. You don't even have to use it at all in order to reach the ending of the game, but if you want to see everything that the game has to offer, you'll have to do some amount of climbing. Now, not all packs are equal. Increasing the number of enemies you see each chamber by 20% equals 1 heat, whereas increasing the speed of enemies by 20% equals 3 heat. The system is so complex that most players will seek outside help and information on how to tackle it, especially when you're going to try taking out 32 heat for the first time. But it's not just the pack that matters. Weapon, aspect, mirror loadout, there's actually a lot of setup and discussion to be had about how someone should go about beating 32 heat. I myself have created numerous videos on how to beat it, including a comprehensive guide. The majority of people looking for this advice would be players that have not yet beaten 32 Heat, or maybe someone who wants to clear it more consistently. And with nearly infinite possibilities as to how to tackle the challenge, how do we determine what the easiest path forward is for these first-time players? Hello, my name's Haelian, and I spent hours poring through Reddit and Discord looking for victory screens from players who said that they had just beaten 32 Heat for the first time. Those victory screens have everything that we need to know about their run to determine how they won, such as the packs they used, the mirror setup they used, the aspects they used, the boons they got, everything. So today we're going to go over the choices those players made and the trends that might show up from their victory screens in order to determine the answer to this question. What is the easiest way to beat 32 Heat for the first time? There are many varying opinions on how to beat 32 Heat easily, and lots of amazing players have shared their wisdom to try to help others. For example, Banana's 32 Heat Guide is a great resource for players looking to tackle the challenge for the first time. But it actually has a very different approach to what I have stated is the easiest method for beating 32 Heat in the past. You see, Banana's guide steers players towards cranking up all damage received and turning off all healing, while reducing a few other packs that typically limit your damage capabilities. No doubt this is a method that can be used to beat 32 Heat, but I've always used a different approach, particularly for first-timers. But there is some definite evidence that the guide is helping players beat 32 Heat for the first time, so my approach is certainly not always the best. Let's dig into the data and find out what players actually use to beat 32 Heat for the first time. I found 136 victory screens, the majority of which were shared on the Hades subreddit and official Discord. I had to make sure that God mode was not used in the run, since that changes too many factors and we just have no idea how much damage reduction they received from it. This way we know all of the players we're looking at were playing at equal levels. Of the 136 clears we collected, only 3 were using Hell mode, or about 2%. Hell mode means that they were required to use a few specific packs, including an exclusive one. I decided to include these 3 clears because the required packs shouldn't make a big impact on the overall data and doesn't necessarily increase or even decrease the difficulty of the challenge. One interesting piece of information is that 1 in 5 players use Stubborn Defiance instead of Death Defiances. This means that they could come back to life once per chamber after having their health drop to 0 instead of having 3 total defiances for the entire run, which could potentially all be used in one chamber. Typically, you'd only want to use the Stubborn Defiance mirror option if you're not receiving any healing because of lasting consequences. But many of the players that did use Stubborn Defiance did not even have lasting consequences at 100%. In fact, only half of the 28 clears using Stubborn Defiance took advantage and used all 4 levels of lasting consequences. I think this just means that, well, receiving 0 healing throughout a run is scary, even when Stubborn Defiance is giving you a slight edge. So what does the average pact look like for these victories? Well, here are the numbers simply averaged out, which probably doesn't tell you a whole lot, but the median numbers tells quite a story. Here is what the median pact of punishment setup looks like. Some things definitely took me by surprise here, but at the same time, the overall pact seems really normal. The only pact that might need the change depending on your build is damage control, since some aspects like Arthur and Hestia really struggle to knock off that shield and clear enemies efficiently. Otherwise, I think it's fair to say that starting with this pact and adding on the last few heats is a great way to get your first 32 heat clear. Now for the last 3 heat, there are a few options. By looking at the pact, the easiest solution is to simply throw on the second forced overtime or third tight deadline level to get us to 32, since each of these is worth 3 heat. But let's try to look at the data to determine what the average player would do. 46% of players took level 2 of forced overtime, which was the most common choice for that pact actually. This has to be the best average pact setup, while remaining true to the data, but it might not work well for all weapons and aspects. For instance, slower weapons like Arthur or Rama will have a harder time when enemies are 40% faster. Tight Deadline is most commonly run at level 2, with the average actually being a little under level 2, but it is a good alternative to taking that second forced overtime level if it's too scary. And then here are some other options that we have. You could round up the average of lasting consequences to level 2 and add on approval process level 1 to reach 32 heat. However, the majority of players really didn't like using approval process. So instead, you could add 1 jury summons and 1 calisthenics program on top of the lasting consequences to reach 32 heat again. This stays more true to the data than using approval process, but I personally don't recommend using calisthenics program anywhere before, 40 heat maybe. Nevertheless, all 3 of these setups feel great to me personally, and I could see myself using and recommending any of them. But what if you, someone who wants to try 32 heat for the first time, don't like some of these packs still? Or what if you're just starting to climb the heat ladder, which packs should take priority first? Let's take a look at which packs are taken the most often to see if we can get a more stripped down template. To start, 75% of players were running at least 1 hard labor. 77% were running both convenience fee levels, which was a slight surprise to me to see just how often it was used. A whopping 80% of players used Extreme Measures 3 exactly, and very rarely any less. 91% took both levels of benefits package, 97% took middle management, and 81% took Underworld Customs. None of these 3 are a big surprise to me. Most players seem to agree that these are the easiest packs to take, even at much lower heat levels. But which packs are players avoiding the most when you look at the data? The 2 packs that were the least used overall were Heightened Security and Routine Inspection. Routine Inspection is so bad that 80% of players used 0 out of the 4 levels offered. It's definitely safe to say that you should leave both of these packs behind. So here is a pack setup using what I would call the definite packs if you're interested in starting somewhere more flexible. These are packs that 75% or more of players used, and I have to say, this is a great way to gain some insight into what people think of certain packs. Overall, this was a really eye-opening experience for me because I was surprised by the massive variety of pack setups used to beat 32 heat from the screens that we collected. I assumed that there would have been more obvious trends, but from what we can see here, only a select few packs really feel certain. And I think this just goes to show the genius of the Pact of Punishment and 32 heat in particular. It doesn't necessarily require a very strict setup, and it can accommodate almost any playstyle for players. There is something to be said about outside sources influencing what people choose for their pact though. For instance, more recent victory screens seem to have a higher amount of Stubborn Defiance usage, possibly attributed to Banana's 32 heat guide, which was published more recently. Meanwhile, older victory screens had a tendency to use 1 approval process, which might have been my fault. Either way, these players eventually got their win, and I'm happy that they found a loadout that worked for them. But this is a potential issue for gathering data. Even if the game hasn't changed, metas still can, so it's possible we still haven't actually found the strongest meta yet for Hades. So now that we know a lot about the packs that were used, let's take a look at what kinds of weapons and aspects were used to win. The favorite aspect by far was Chiron for the bow, which was used for 28 of the 136 clears that we collected. That's 1 in every 5 players, and I was a bit surprised about this. I always knew that Chiron was a favorite aspect of many, but I don't think I had a good grasp of how well it seemed to work for so many players at 32 heat. I think this just goes to show not just how much players like the aspect of Chiron, but also just how confident they are with it. Personally, I would most often recommend Aspect of Chaos for the shield to people asking, which only accounted for 4% of the clears that we collected, so I was probably wrong for recommending it, honestly. I think Chiron is popular for a lot of reasons, but one might be just how flexible and straightforward it is. Get a special boon, almost any special boon, attack, special, repeat. Not to mention it's just a really powerful aspect as well. The second most used aspect was Eris for the rail at 13%, which makes sense considering just how powerful it is across all difficulties and challenges in the game. Third is tied for two aspects that kinda surprised me, Hestia for the rail and Zag Fist. I personally love Aspect of Hestia, but I've never been quick to recommend it to players because of the narrow playstyle. And Zag Fist was a surprise mostly because it's a Zag aspect, and none of the other Zag aspects saw a lot of love. Aspect of Demeter for the Fist was close behind in 5th place at 8%. I actually kind of expected the Fist to take up a higher percentage overall since it's often listed as many players' favorite weapon. But what about the least used weapons and aspects? Well, the Spear only got a total of 3 clears across the entire weapon, with none from Aspect of Zagreus and Guan Yu. Guan Yu is no surprise, but Zag Spear actually has a few cheesy builds that can carry through 32 heat pretty easily. The sword also saw a low clear rate with only 11 clears total, 8 of which were with the Aspect of Arthur. Aspect of Zag and Poseidon for the sword received 0 clears, I'm afraid. There was even one clear that used no aspect at all with the rail. That's right, someone had cleared 32 heat with the rail, but had not unlocked aspects for the weapon yet. And the rail was actually the most used weapon overall with 38 clears total, but the bow was close behind with 36 clears. So what kinds of builds were used for these wins? Well, this information is a lot more difficult to dissect and is a bit more subjective. I did my best to capture the essence of what helped each player win from their victory screen and recorded it here. The most common build utilized a lot of Zeus boons actually, typically either the attack or the special with static discharge and maybe the call boon from Zeus as well. After that we saw a surprising amount of builds with Merciful End, especially when using the fists. The favorite build when using Aspect of Chiron, Dionysus on the special, followed up by duo boons from gods like Aphrodite, Ares, and Artemis. There was one victory screen that used the Aspect of Arthur and Zeus's attack, which is a major anti-synergy given the slow nature of Arthur, yet they still managed to make it work. A few players actually skipped taking attack and special boons altogether and ran the Shackle keepsake for a win. The least used god? Kind of hard to say, but not many builds seem to rely on Poseidon's attack or special. However, several Beowulf clears used Poseidon's cast, Flood Flare. So how long should you wait until you attempt 32 heat? Well, I can't really say when you should start, but what I can tell you is that the average first timer had 86 total clears on their save file when they won. The highest amount of clears on one screen, a whopping 295 before beating 32 heat for the first time. And the lowest, just 19 clears. It's probably worth mentioning that there should be some skepticism for low clear rates like this though, since it could be a player who started a new save file but decided not to mention that fact when posting their screenshot. I specifically left out a few victory screens where the player said that it wasn't their first playthrough. Having said that, it's definitely possible to beat 32 heat with only a handful of clears on your save file, but it's just not easy. So what are the takeaways of all this information? Can we answer the question of what is the easiest pact setup for a first 32 heat clear? And I think we can give a rough guideline of where players should start, but I think it's also important to let them know where things are flexible so that they can rearrange to make something comfortable for themselves. And at the end of the day, the pact of punishment is incredibly complex and there will never be one simple answer to such a complex system. But to answer the question a bit more directly, I think I would say that if you want the best odds of beating 32 heat for the first time, you should use Aspect of Chiron with a pack setup that looks like what you see on the screen here. We saw the most success using a setup like this out of all the victory screens that we collected, so I think it's safe to say this is probably the easiest way to beat 32 heat. But there's still one more takeaway from this entire endeavor, but it's a bit more personal, honestly. You see, while working on this project, I went through hundreds of different victory screens, and I happened to read all of the stories that came with all those screens. Stories about what worked, what didn't, what they liked, and what they hated. And after going through all of these stories, it really showed me just how resilient Hades players are and how much love they have for the game and the people who made it. Some told a story of stoicism where it took them dozens of attempts and hours upon hours before they finally broke through. Others told a story of luck and grit where they managed to beat 32 heat on their first try. They had simply lacked the confidence to attempt it sooner. And it always brought a smile to my face to see just how excited they were to tell the world about their success, to let people know, hey, I did something that is worth celebrating, even if it's just in their favorite video game. And now I hope that you'll all tell me your stories as well. Thanks for watching. Thank you to Zanger and my wonderful community for helping me with the data that you saw here. I couldn't have done it without you. If you're interested in more Hades and general gaming content, please subscribe and tell me what you'd like to see in the comments.